Big Brother. It's a game where you walk in with 12 to 15 total strangers in complete isolation in the hopes of making it all the way to the end. The whole idea is that these are regular, everyday people that you don't know. However, that's not always the case. Whether it's on purpose or not, there have been times where some of the house guests walking into the house weren't complete strangers. They walk in and see someone they had known from their past life before Big Brother. This is what we call a pre-existing relationship. When two house guests play Big Brother while knowing each other from before the game, it offers them an extreme advantage that the other players simply don't have. Even if you weren't best buddies with this person, there is oftentimes a pre-established layer of trust that naturally forms, as they are a speck of familiarity in a brand new unfamiliar world. Sometimes the pair is known to the other house guests, whereas other times it's a secret kept from everyone else. We have seen some great successes in the past, but we've also seen some pretty glorious failures. Today, we'll be looking at the successes and failures of pre-existing relationships inside the Big Brother house.
He was a little paranoid at times.
Amanda Craig, someone I wouldn't want coming in the house to visit me.
Now, before we officially begin, I am making one rule. I am not including pre-existing returning player relationships. On returning seasons, for the most part, every veteran is familiar with one another, and it kind of defeats the purpose of this video if I start going through every connection the returning players possibly had with one another. So for simplicity's sake, I will mostly just be looking at new player pre-existing relationships. If you're bummed I'm not including it, here is the briefest of breakdowns for pre-existing relationships in returning player seasons. In Big Brother All-Stars, the Season 6 players dominated in the beginning of the season. The Season 5 players did the opposite and were all evicted basically immediately, and Chilltown ran the season strategically and won. In Big Brother 13, the returning duos were all split up eventually. Dick left the game immediately, Jeff was sniped out at the final 7, and Brendan sacrificed his game for Rachel, which actually ended up with her going on to win the season. In Big Brother 14, the only returnees that had a prior game connection were Boogie and Janelle from when they played on All-Stars. They targeted each other the whole time and were both out pre-jury. In Big Brother 18, James and Devon both returned from Season 17, and while they worked together, Devon was taken out at the beginning of the jury phase, ending their game connection. And lastly, in Big Brother 22, Memphis did not want to play with Keisha, and she was evicted first. Janelle and Kaser both were out early, and Cody and Nicole thrived as they both made it to the end game, but Cody won after blindsiding the out of Nicole at the very end. There were a few relationships that I didn't touch upon in the All-Star seasons, but hey, sue me. With that, let's get into the real meat and potatoes of the video.
You'll get rid of Will Thursday?
No, I'm saying let's get rid of Will next week.
I don't trust you.
The first pre-existing relationships to enter the Big Brother house happened in Big Brother 4. The twist for the season was that some of the house guests would enter the house alongside their ex-lovers, giving us 5 pre-existing relationships to look at. And to say that there were varying degrees of success would be an understatement. Our first pair is Amanda and Scott, and Scott had a bit of a psychotic breakdown after learning that Amanda would be in the house. Scott was later expelled from the game, and Amanda was the first evicted house guest. Not a great start. The next pair of exes, David and Michelle, didn't fare too much better either. They never worked together inside the house, and neither found success, as Michelle was evicted in week 2 and David was evicted in week 3. So far, we're 0 for 2. The third pair, Justin and Allison, never worked too well together. However, they both individually found success in the house. Justin placed 7th, and Allison manipulated and comped her way to the final 2, where she finished in 2nd place. Now, the last 2 pairs of exes were able to put aside their differences from their past and work together to better their games. The 4th pair and the first to work well together is Erica and Robert, and while they didn't necessarily start off on the right foot, as Robert tried to evict her in week 2, they eventually became loyal to one another and almost made it to the final 2 together. They made it all the way to the final 4 and were the last exes standing before they were each evicted by Allison. Erica was evicted in 4th place, and Robert was evicted in 3rd. Overall, they played well and were the second most successful pair of exes, only behind the 5th and final pair, June and G. Inside the house, they played it off that they couldn't stand each other, but secretly were working together behind the scenes, which greatly helped both of their games. They were both strong players in their own rights, but after G kinda screwed himself at the final 6 by winning far more comps than he should have in that round, June won the final 5 HOH and decided that it was finally time to cut her ties and evict G. June then went on to make it to the final 2, where she garnered enough votes to win the entire game, becoming the winner of Big Brother 4. June and G's pre-existing relationship was quite interesting to watch and definitely helped with both of their successes in the game.
He proposed to me. I accepted. We moved in together.
It took us like 2 weeks to when we first moved in, and I was like, what the is going on here?
I don't date Asian men. I only date Caucasian males.
David was my serious boyfriend my freshman year of high school.
I wanted to have sex with her.
The very next season brought us 2 more pre-existing relationships. Sort of. In Big Brother 5, houseguest Adria was secretly switching places with her sister Natalie throughout the first 4 weeks of the game, pretending to just be one person. After surviving the 4 weeks, the secret was revealed to the house and Natalie was allowed to enter the game as her own player. The women were positioned pretty well while they were playing as one person, but once Adria won HOH and the twins went back on their alliance, they both became house pariahs. Natalie was evicted the following week after Adria won the veto and saved herself, but that didn't give Adria much more life and she was still evicted right after Natalie. Overall, it was a medium success, but they definitely fell hard. The second kind of pre-existing relationship is Cowboy and Nokomis. Their pre-existing relationship is kind of up in the air because it didn't actually exist. They didn't know one another before Big Brother, but while inside the house, they learned that they were actually siblings and shared the same father. So even without knowing each other beforehand, this added layer of being siblings did have an effect in the game. Unfortunately, they didn't really work that well together. Cowboy turned his back on playing with Nokomis. Nokomis nominated Cowboy 2 out of the 3 times she was HOH, with one of the times planning on evicting him, and Cowboy cast the sole vote to evict Nokomis at the final 4. So as a duo, they didn't work that well together, but what can you expect? They didn't actually know each other.
We're relatives in the house together. I would take you.
How can you tell me that you want me to win when we're not on the same side?
I'm your sister.
After back-to-back seasons with some of the players having pre-existing relationships, the producer said, screw it, everyone gets a pre-existing relationship. The twist of Big Brother 6 is that the house was filled with 7 secret partners in which each pairing consisted of 2 people that knew each other from their home lives, and every pair thought that they were the only pre-existing relationship in the house. If a secret pair made it to the final 2 together, the prize for the season would increase, with the runner-up receiving $250,000 and the winner making a cool $1 million. However, because this was known throughout the house, the pairs were split up pretty early on and no pair made a deep run together. Now, since every person in this game had a pre-existing relationship, I am not going to go too in-depth on things as that would take forever, but just know that there were successes and failures across the board. Ashleigh and Janelle were ex-roommates, but Ashleigh was evicted first, leaving Janelle to fend for herself for the rest of the season. Michael and Kaser were neighbors from home, and while Kaser ended up being a huge fan favorite, neither of them found success game-wise and were both out pre-jury. Maggie and Eric were friends before Big Brother, but after Eric made himself an early target, Eric was evicted third from the house, leaving Maggie on her own. But Maggie did well and managed to win the entire game. James and Sarah were dating before the show started and were doing somewhat alright in the house before their alliance member Howie turned on them, resulting in Sarah's eviction and leaving James alone in the house. April and Jennifer were sorority sisters before coming into the game and were doing just fine until Jennifer made a big move to get Kaser evicted, which made her an instant target and she was evicted immediately afterwards, leaving April to play with the rest of her alliance where she ended up making it decently far. Howie and Rachel were best friends coming into the game, and in my opinion, they were the most interesting pair in the house, mostly because I just never understood how Rachel handled being Howie's best friend. The two were definitely a big threat as a duo and did some damage in the house, but being one of the last intact duos standing around the mid-game, they were both nominated together in Week 7 and Rachel was evicted, which left just one intact duo left in the game, Beau and Yvette. Beau and Yvette were former co-workers, and technically speaking, you could say that they were the most successful duo as they were the longest lasting duo in the house, but recognizing this, the two were nominated together at the final 6, and Beau was eliminated from the game, breaking up the last pair in the house and cutting off the last pre-existing relationship in the house. Overall, it was a success entertainment-wise, but ultimately no secret pair managed to leverage their pre-existing relationship enough to make strides in the game, which resulted in no pair making it past the final 6. Still an awesome twist, though.
We're not the only ones. Yvette knows Beau. April knows somebody too, and I can't figure out who it is.
I don't think anybody in this household would suspect such a nice, clean-cut girl like Rachel would go out with an obnoxious, good-looking pig like me.
We're so different, and he's so out there.
Yeah, I gotta admit
Put them down.
I gotta admit they're turning me on right now.
After All Stars, the producers yet again brought in pre-existing relationships in the form of a twist in Big Brother 8. 3 house guests were to have their rivals come in to play the game in the hopes of stirring up drama. The first pair, Carol and Jessica, were ex-best friends and did not get to use their relationship to their advantage as Carol was evicted first. The second pair, Dustin and Joe, were ex-boyfriends and did not choose to use their pre-existing relationship to their advantage, instead continuing on with their rivalry, which culminated in Dustin helping to get Joe nominated and evicted in Week 2. 0 for 2 so far in Big Brother 8, but the third pair chose to take an opposite approach. Dick and Danielle were an estranged father-daughter pairing that hadn't spoken in years, but their relationship flourished inside the house. The two worked very well together. They were a competitive nightmare to go up against, against, and through their fight, their extremely interesting dynamic, and a little bit of help from America, Dick and Danielle made it to the final 2 together, where Dick won the grand prize. They were probably, on paper, the greatest success of all time for all the pre-existing relationships in the entire show.
It's my ex. He's wearing my shirt and I'm wearing his shirt. Oh, he's very manipulative.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He has gigantic nipples.
Being nominated against Danielle is the worst case scenario. It cuts short the time that I have to reestablish our relationship, and I want more time.
Congratulations, Dick. You are the winner of Big Brother 8.
As if 5 seasons in a row wasn't enough, Big Brother 9 came in as season number 6 to have pre-existing relationships, and Big Brother went evil on this one. The theme of the season was love, and immediately had every houseguest paired up with their soulmate for the season. So, of course, it's no surprise that Big Brother cast the ex-lovers of Jacob and Sharon and paired the two together in an attempt to watch tensions grow. Sharon was a fine player, but Jacob is probably the worst player of all time and went after the pair with the sole power to evict in the first week, which led to them being evicted first. There was a second secret pre-existing relationship in the house though, this one being Jen and Ryan. Unlike Jacob and Sharon, these two were currently in a relationship, which would make them being paired up as lovers much easier on them, right? Well, yes, which is exactly why Big Brother decided to pair them up with others in the house as opposed to each other. This is very evil and made things very interesting when they were nominated against each other in the second week. Jen went absolutely crazy and tried doing anything she could to stay in the house over Ryan, even going as far as to say that Ryan was racist. Needless to say, they did not succeed as a pre-existing duo as Jen was evicted in week 2. 2 very clear failures in Big Brother 9, but wow was it entertaining. Oh, and also, there was the pre-existing relationship of the guinea pigs in the house, but we all know that's a little bogus.
But, you know, Ryan knows to trust me that I would never do anything to embarrass him.
Ryan is also racist. What? Ryan is also racist. What?
After Big Brother 9, Big Brother realized that having 6 straight seasons of pre-existing relationships was a lot, so they stopped having that for a long time. The next time we saw people that knew each other ahead of time was in Big Brother 17, where we had a double whammy. Jeff and Jackie, 2 players that were partnered on The Amazing Race, were brought onto Big Brother as a twist from Phil Kogan. And while the two remained loyal to each other, Austin felt threatened by Jeff's increasingly better position in the early game and managed to get Jeff evicted in week 3, ending The Amazing Racers' time together. Where they failed though, the other duo succeeded. The twin twist was brought back from season 5, this time being with houseguests Liz and Julia. Although the two were discovered to be twins really early on, they still managed to survive through week 5, which allowed for Julia to enter the game as her own player, and the two, alongside Austin, became the figurehead alliance of the season called the Oz Twins. They were dominant and controlled a lot of the action for the season. However, unfortunately for them, they were nominated next to each other at the final 6 and were forced to split apart as Julia was evicted in 6th place. Overall, I would definitely call the Nolan twins' time on the show a success.
Honestly, just like know your loyalties, Liz. Obviously, we're not gonna vote for him, you know. Can you hold the nail polish? Be aware that the catalyst of this whole twin thing after Davon left was Jeff. Oh my god, did you do our laundry? Yes, you're so annoying.
Just 1 season later in Big Brother 18, we get the babiest of pre-existing relationships. We have Nicole and Paulie, who had briefly met in the past through Big Brother 16's Cody. Nicole played alongside Cody in Big Brother 16, and Paulie was Cody's brother, so there was a little bit of rapport established between the two going into the season. During the season, the two were very closely aligned and ran a good chunk of the game together, and while Paulie was evicted in the middle of the jury stage, Nicole ended up winning the game, so overall, I'd call this tiny pre-existing relationship a success.
You have got to be kidding me. Of course, Nicole from my brother's season's on the show. Cody got close with her in his season, sent her packing. She could 100% take that out on me. Thank you very much, bro.
And lastly, we have Big Brother 21. For the first time, as far as I'm aware, the producers did not intend to have any pre-existing relationships, but somehow they ended up with 2, possibly even 3. The first one is the obvious one, Tommy and Christie. Christie had dated Tommy's aunt for 7 years, and the two of them were quite close. So when they found each other in the house, they were an instant unbreakable final 2. The two were power players all season long, and each made a deep run, but were ultimately backed into a corner with nowhere left to run at the final 6, where they were nominated to together and Christie went home. Also in the house were Holly and Kat, who had been in the same pageants together years prior and were in the same friend circles. They weren't friends, but they knew one another, and it led to them working together inside of the house, but they were called out for knowing one another after Jackson let that knowledge slip and Kat was taken out in the early jury stage. We're not done with Holly yet though, as it's rumored that Holly also knew Jackson before the season started. I've heard that Holly was friends with Jackson's roommate and that Jackson was following Holly on social media before the season started. This one is definitely the one I am the least confident on. Regardless of if there was a little bit of a pre-existing relationship there or not, they worked really well together and made it to the final two, which is definitely a success.
I see Christie Murphy walks in the door.
Hi, how are you? You can call me Kat.
She dated someone in my family for the last 7 years. Oh my God. Holy. This is wild.
Kat, who for a while.
Mickey tells me that Holly and Kat.
Like, you clearly all know each other. You, Kat, and Kat obviously
all know
know
each
each
other.
other. You went to Stagecoach together. You made a comment in here.
Oh my God,
She
are
knows
you
what kind of
joking?
You guys
shoes
know each
wore.
other.
You can always look at me and see hope. What? You can always look at me and see hope. What? You can always look at me and see hope.
I don't.
And there we go. Pre-existing relationships have plagued the Big Brother house since basically the beginning. Whether intentional or unintentional, it's had a major effect on the game. So much so, in fact, that every season to have a pre-existing relationship of some form has had someone in the pre-existing relationship in the final two. Just something to think about. But with all the successes, we've seen a ton of failures, whether it be ex-lovers, old rivals, or just people not that compatible with playing Big Brother. Pre-existing relationships have ruined some players' chances at winning Big Brother, but that's all to be expected. As with any type of archetype or pairing that I do these videos on, there will always be successes and there will always be failures. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you're new here because that would be pretty cool. Special thank you to my YouTube members who would assuredly never use a pre-existing relationship to their advantage, as they like to play the game fair and square. And as always, here's a clip for you on your way out.
Did you mention to them that you slept with my best friend to get back at me?
No, I didn't do it to get back at you. I really loved Nate. I loved Nate more than I ever loved you.
Who sleeps with your best friend's ex-boyfriend? That's awful. I felt awful about it, but I did it.
I destroyed his entire life. I went through and annihilated all of his friendships. I've done horrible things to this guy. Somehow, I immaculately conceived gonorrhea. What? Oh my God!
Joe could have got gonorrhea anywhere.